You see that Hank Berg is joining us from Casco Bay Lines as well. He's here as an attendee and may want to speak to the group about item number 5 on Casco Bay Lines tip amendment. We can either take his comment at the beginning, or if we prefer, we can wait till that agenda item, Matt.
Yeah, let's pull Hank in when we get to that, and on number 5, that'd be great. That way it'll be pertinent to the topic that we have at hand.
Sure, sounds good.
Morning, Chris. Glad to see you took that link in. Andrew was typing furiously to get you in.
I made it. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Andrew.
Here's Greg now.
Okay, good.
Hi, this is Greg. I'm in.
Hey, good morning,
Thanks.
Greg.
Hi,
Good
Ned.
to have you on board. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So we now have a quorum. Not that we're waiting for Greg for that. We had a quorum, but I know Greg was trying to get in, and we got Chris here as well, who's going to be helping us out on a couple of items. So glad everybody. Thank you for your patience and working through the technology. So welcome and happy Tuesday, and welcome to this month's chapter of the PACTS Executive Committee agenda. So I hope everybody's still holding up well in these remarkable times that we live in. To get that started, we have the opportunity for public comment for items that are not on the items that are on the agenda or not on the agenda, notwithstanding Hank Berg, who will pull in on number 5 regarding the Casco Bay Lines tip question. So are there any comments from the public that would like to be provided at this time? Seeing none, I think we'll move along. We had last met on September 1st, and we have minutes from that meeting, and it is attachment A, and I hope folks have had the opportunity to review them. And if so, are there any changes, or is there a motion to accept them as submitted?
Move to accept.
Thank you, Jim.
A second.
Thanks, Aaron. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ryan, would you be so kind as to call the roll call?
Or Jim,
Yes.
Chris, Chris French.
Yes.
Hey, thanks, Chris. And Tom Reinauer, sitting in
Yes.
for Jennifer.
Yep.
Thanks, Tom. Aaron,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
and Matt.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to item number 4. This is the staff report, also identified as attachment B in your agenda, and Chris Chop is going to bring us up to speed on the staff report.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So a couple items on the staff report, and I'll move pretty quickly. On the, as you know, one of the CARES Act Phase 2 projects was a regional marketing communications campaign that we recently kicked off. This is a campaign to rebuild transit ridership in the wake of the pandemic, and to convey strategic messages to the public regarding the safety of transit during these challenging times. And it really does have a regional focus. The study formally kicked off pretty recently on September 22nd. We convened a group for a kickoff meeting. The group was comprised of transit agency leaders, as well as marketing communications specialists at the agencies. And the idea was really to develop a shared understanding of the study and really move into the first phase of the project to communicate how safe transit is to the general public, and to do so using a variety of different communications, media, and techniques and messages. We also recently hired a digital media specialist to assist Tom Bell, who's the project manager on GPCOG's side in this effort. And she'll be super valuable in convening the transit agencies, making sure we're all on the same page and getting the right messages out to the public. The second item is the funding framework. As you know, we've been working feverishly to kind of reinvigorate the way we prioritize investments in the region. There's limited funding, and especially during these challenging times, it's even in times where we've seen overages on construction costs, necessitates the really need to take a hard look at the way we prioritize investments and move projects along. So we're working with AECOM on that, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback throughout the process from our TIP committee. They most recently reviewed the draft framework on September 15th, and you see some of the key components in that draft funding framework shown in that little table. There's a pretty significant lengthy document behind all of this if you want to dig into details, and there's a link to the most recent meeting in the staff report here. We'll also be presenting this information and a revised version of the framework to the committee on October 20th. You'll still have these 4 categories that you see here, these evaluation criteria categories for regional access, safe and reliable mobility, efficient land use, and environmental sustainability. Point totals will change a little bit. I think we're going to try to round it, get a nice round number in 50 rather than 51. And there's several other changes that were recommended by the TIP committee that staff are looking at currently. The hope is that on October 20th, the TIP committee blesses the revised funding framework, and then we can ultimately get it to policy and exec. Given time constraints, we may actually ask the policy committee to dedicate or designate this authority to the executive committee to approve the funding framework and the associated policies and procedures, which we're updating as well. So more to come on that. Transit tomorrow, the third item on the staff report. The project's wrapping up, long-range transit plan, looking 25, 30 years out. And we presented the plan recommendations to the project advisory committee recently on September 25th. And we have a link to the presentation in the staff report. The plan recommendations include land use recommendations that intersect with transportation, and then a couple different buckets of projects to make transit easier, create more frequent connections, which is something we've heard throughout the planning process, the need for more frequent service now and in the future, and then introducing or improving rapid transit in the region, whether it's through bus rapid transit or light rail or enhanced commuter rail services. And then, as I mentioned, land use kind of touches on all of these aspects. So we're working with the PAC to get their final feedback, and this should be ready for public review and comment we're looking at probably late October, November for that, certainly before Thanksgiving. Any questions from folks?
Jim?
Yep.
Yeah, one of the things I suggest is if you can, when you're done doing the exercise of figuring out how you want to change the formula, that you go back and grab some applications and then run it through that and see how those would have changed the scores to make sure that the outcome is what the desire was in the beginning. Sometimes when you're out here doing all this sort of high level discussions and you're working through that, what you think you did doesn't actually result in when you actually run it through the application. And I've seen times when that kind of work ended up having results and everybody's like looking at each other in the room going, this is not what we thought we were going to end up having as an outcome. I certainly would like to be able to have some of that knowledge before I'd be asked to vote on a change to the scoring criteria.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And we did a couple things throughout the process. We did run some dummy projects. They weren't actual projects, but different types of multimodal transportation improvements in the framework. So that provided some insight, and that's provided in, I think, the appendices of the framework materials. The second thing we're doing is exactly what you mentioned. We're running some actual projects through it. I'll note that it won't be 100% complete because some of the data depends on current or upcoming studies. So for example, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the Long Range Transportation Plan for the region, is one where the framework recommends using that plan to develop some additional criteria and data points that we don't have as part of this framework. But for the most part, it'll be pretty ready to go, and I think it'll provide enough information for you. It's a great suggestion. Thanks, Jim.
Other questions or comments for Chris?
Matt, I can see that Tom Milligan, who's joining us as an attendee, has his hand up. I don't know if you want to take Tom's comments now.
Sure.
Okay, one moment, Tom. I'll unmute you.
All right, thanks for letting me speak. I guess I would request, and I'll tell you what my concern is first. I sat in on the TIP meeting last time and saw all the categories and understood what I was reading. My concern is how the PACTS MPI is going to be treated as part of this document. It seemed to me, and with my currently understanding, that was going to be evaluated under the same point framework. I mentioned this to the PACTS Tech Committee at our meeting last, and there was quite a bit of concern about that approach on a process that's, if it's not broke, don't fix it. The intent of the PACTS MPI is to provide funding to certain smaller projects, if you will, within the region, and to make that application process too onerous. I mean, I think it defeats the intent. We look at a lot of collector paving. There's a lot of times that's the only way we can get any amount of funding, even though it's only 50%, it's still better than nothing. So I would hope or request that this document be ready for the next PACTS Tech Committee meeting to review and perhaps provide input on. See, I know there was quite a bit of concern when I mentioned it. Whether I should have or not, I don't know, but certainly it's a issue that I think needs to be addressed. It's a whole different beast than these complex projects. And I'll leave it at that at this point. I appreciate you letting me comment. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it, Tom. Thanks for your input. The MPI is a particularly challenging one, and we've, as you know, from the last meeting, we did a poll of the TIP committee, and folks generally supported bringing MPI into the funding framework. There was a bit of a split on whether to keep a sub-regional component to that or not. We've had some additional conversations with some folks around the region to get a little bit more insight on that, and haven't reached any formal conclusions, but there will be a recommendation in that October 20 packet, which is set to go out next week. So we'll be coming up with a game plan shortly on MPI. As far as presenting to additional committees, I mean, I think the intent, certainly with the TIP committee, was to draw on expertise from all of our committees and to have broad-based representation as part of that body. I know we have tech committee members and we have executive committee members on that. All 7 transit agencies are represented. So hopefully it's a good cross-section to get us to that kind of multidisciplinary approach. The last thing I'll say is there are still proposed set-asides for collector paving, so that collector paving projects do not go through the full funding framework. And on the transit side, currently, some of the system preservation projects will not go, and state of good repair will not go through the full funding framework until better data is in place to bring those projects in. Thanks, Tom.
Any further questions for Chris? All right, seeing none, we'll move on then to number 5. Thanks, Chris. Great job on that, and look forward to seeing future work product come forward. So thank you for that. Let's see, we have the approval of the Transportation Improvement Program Amendment for Casco Bay Line's Ferry Boat Discretionary Program Grant Award. And Ryan, would you be so kind as to tee this up for us, and then we'll go for a comment as well.
Yep, thanks, Matt. So the executive committee is required periodically to amend our transportation improvement program. We need to do that anytime a project is added or deleted to or from the STIP. And early this summer, we received the very welcome news from FTA that Casco Bay Lines will be receiving a $3.2 million in federal funding to purchase a new electric hybrid propulsion system for a new passenger ferry vessel as part of a vehicle replacement project. The local match is 20% of that federal amount. We did post the amendment for a 10-day public comment period to the PACTS website. The comment period closed on September 16th. We did not receive any public comments, and the ask is for the executive committee to go ahead and approve the TIP amendment for that $3.2 million in federal funding and corresponding local match for the Casco Bay Lines electric propulsion project. And I know Hank Berg with CBL is here. We might want to take any comments Hank has for the committee.
That'd be great, Hank. If you do, please you do your raised hand option, and we'll jump you into the gang. There we go.
You should be able to speak, Hank.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So as you know, we try to go after discretionary funds to free up formula funds to help with the transit agency's 6-year capital and operating plan. And Casco Bay Lines has had several recent successes with discretionary grants, including this project, which is to procure a diesel-electric hybrid propulsion system for the new PEACS replacement ferry. And just so you guys know, it's complemented with a $750K award from MARAD, which is the Marine Division of DOT. And in addition to that, $100K from the state's VW settlement fund. So just a slight correction on what Ryan said. The federal award is $3.2 million, but the local match is 20% of the total, so it's $800K. So it's for a total of $4 million. And we're extremely excited about this. We typically are risk averse because we can't break down, but we became convinced the technology is mature in especially in the Scandinavian countries, and it's ready to be deployed, and it's starting to be deployed in the passenger ferry world. And when we do this, and if we can run all electric, we'll actually save over 800 metric tons of CO2 emission annually. Just so you all know, there is one more hurdle that we have to get through to be able to run full electric. It's not the topic for today, but just to make you aware of it, that we are dealing with an issue of the cost of electricity is cost prohibitive to charge the batteries in the system during peak demand times. So the peak demand rate for CMP, we won't be able to charge during that because it just is not cost effective. So we were trying to work with them. Matter of fact, I was just on a call with MARAD before this one to talk to them about it, and we're meeting with the Department of Energy representatives tomorrow here in Portland. But anyway, back to this one. This is a great win for us. And just so you know, the actual total discretionary grant availability for this was $30 million nationwide. And so we were able to win $3.2 million for that. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Hank. That was great to put everything into context, and great information. Any questions for Hank or for Ryan, or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion there to amend the TIP to include the purchase of an electric hybrid propulsion system for Casco Bay Lines Ferry for $3.2 million in federal funding and 20% in local match?
Make that motion.
Thanks, Chris. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Greg. Any further discussion?
I did have a quick question, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
Yep. Thanks, Greg.
Matt. Just for Ryan, and this I could take this offline, but as you may know, Metro also received discretionary funding to replace 2 buses through FTA's 5339 competitive program. I guess it was awarded back in August, and just wanted to confirm that we're going through a similar process with the TIP to make those adjustments as needed. It may not be completely necessary because the funding may have already been captured in the TIP, but I wanted to just double check that. Don't have to answer now, just a flag for later.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I'll make sure we're handling that appropriately. Thanks.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Ryan, would you be so kind as to call the roll?
Yep.
Thank you.
Jim,
Yes.
Chris Branch,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Reinauer. Thanks, Tom. Aaron,
Yes.
Eric Dudley,
Yes.
and welcome, Eric. And Greg
Yes.
and Matt.
Yes.
Thanks.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And
Thank you.
again, thank you, Hank, for coming on board and providing us the extra info today. Next item we have is number 6, preliminary design report, set aside project selection. This is attachment C in your packet, and Chris Chop is back with us to tee this up. So thanks, Chris, again.
I'm back. Thanks, Matt. All right, so this is another lengthy staff report, and I'll try to be as brief as possible. In the summer of 2020, the PACTS Executive and Policy Committees approved the allocation of $150,000 in FHWA funds for 2023, and then obviously there'd be a $50,000 local match, so $200,000 total to fund one complex project for preliminary design report for PDR. And after that approval from the governing bodies, PACTS reached out to municipalities, letting them know that there'd be an application process using the old funding framework, since the new one wasn't quite ready for prime time. And we received 6 applications by the August 17th, 2020 deadline. And I'll note 6 applications, 1 from Biddeford, 4 from Portland, 1 from Cape Elizabeth, all really, really good projects, all competitive projects, and they all scored pretty well in the old funding framework. So staff reviewed the projects and scored them accordingly and presented the scores on September 15th, 2020. And at that point, we actually did receive some input from the central subregion that they wanted to allocate points for one particular project in Portland, Portland's Forest Ave from Marginal Way to Park Ave, allocating all 10 points in this old funding framework. And that would have actually moved the project, that particular project, from 4th to 1st. And I should note that Biddeford's project prior to that point scored the highest with 76 points. And so that was the top rated project. So here we are with 2 really, really competitive projects and a little bit of a complicated way to move them forward with the need to and the desire to move them both forward. The planning committee had an interesting suggestion to utilize holding wind funds to fund another PDR project. So we looked into that. We met with the DOT to discuss our holding wind balance and to ensure that it was a prudent approach if we moved forward with a transfer or recommended a transfer. And they seemed to think, yeah, it was a great idea to keep additional projects moving along on the conveyor belt, if you will, and getting them ready for subsequent design and construction. So after meeting with the DOT, we informed the TIP committee that the funds were in fact available and that DOT was comfortable with the approach, with acknowledging the fact that it wouldn't be too many projects on that conveyor belt, too many to fund in the future. So we felt comfortable with it. TIP committee voted to approve both projects, and actually with Biddeford as the #1 project, because of the initial scoring, the fact that it scored the highest in that initial scoring process, and the Portland project as #2, and that's the from Marginal to Park Ave along Forest Avenue. Both are multimodal transportation projects, improving multimodal level of service, pedestrian connectivity, part of the reasons they were so competitive. And so today, we're looking for a few different actions from you all. One is to approve the holding wind transfer of $150,000 from that FHWA, from our holding wind to fund another preliminary design report, another project for that. And then the second, if so, would be to adopt the selection of both projects. The Biddeford project to receive the holding wind funds, because actually it's probably a little bit more ready to go, and those holding wind funds could be utilized immediately, whereas the FHWA PDR funds wouldn't be available until next calendar year. And second project, Portland's Smart Corridor Route 302 study, Forest Ave to Marginal, from Marginal to Park. And so that's the ask today, for you to review what we've presented, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And we're fortunate enough to have a couple of the project sponsors on board today too, with Tom and Chris Branch.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Any questions or comments for Chris on this, or to the subject matter? Jim, go for it.
Obviously, I'm okay with the staff recommendations. I am concerned about what does this mean going in the future. If after things are open, we can then say, wait a minute, we want to change our mind. I mean, I go back to our last meeting, and we were the only community that in the, as we looked at the MPI projects, we were the only community that didn't do 50-50. And everybody else did 50-50, and there was some cash that was laying on the table. And does that mean I can say, we really meant to do 50-50 instead of doing the 60-40 and the 25-75? I mean, where is this precedent as it starts going down the road? And how does that impact future decisions? And I'm just a little concerned about what does that mean going forward.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jim. I would say as part of the funding framework project, we are revisiting the PACTS TIP policies and procedures, and things like holding wind balance and unallocated resources would certainly be part of that conversation. We're not quite there yet with the TIP committee, but hoping to get there soon. So to your point, yeah, it's something we want to take a hard look at and provide.
Well, I guess it's more than that. I mean, the concern is that all of a sudden the applications that didn't do, quite frankly, they didn't do their job if they didn't go get the regional points. I mean, we did. And so now all of a sudden, oh, there were 10 points we left on the table. We're going to go get them now. I mean, personally, I would have been much more comfortable if the recommendation from staff was, boy, we have really good projects. And so therefore we recommend the additional allocation of the next 200,000. And the next one on the list was, based on the applications, was this project, which I believe was a Portland project anyways. And Portland said, yeah, we're really happy with that, but I would much rather switch the project to the 302 project. So there was consistency in the application process, and there was consistency within the rules. But what we're saying is we're changing the rules after everything's done, and somehow that doesn't feel right for me. Again, I'm okay with where we're going and what we're going to do, and the recommendation to be able to do the 302 project, and the fact that, you know, this hasn't bumped Biddeford's project out of the loop. But every time we do these sort of manipulations per se, or we do something that's a little different than what we said we were going to do, I think it creates additional credibility issues as we go down the road. And you know, all of a sudden, when's it okay to change, and when's it all right to do something different? I just
Jim, can I jump in
sorry.
here? Because I agree with you that it's really difficult, and I know that staff really struggled with this particular situation, you know, given that we do want to make sure that we're hearing from our municipalities, and in this case, the deadline wasn't met, but we did have the opinion weighed in at the last minute. Well, actually after the last minute. So you're absolutely right about that. I'll also say that with the MPI process, we had a similar issue where we didn't get the, we weren't able to engage the subregions in getting us the information as staff in the timely way that we needed. The funding framework is going to get rid of this piece of the process where we're asking for communities to weigh in some way, and that fits into the scoring. So hopefully going forward, that funding framework is going to be a lot more objective. It won't have these situations. So hopefully this is the last time it'll happen. And you know, if you're satisfied with a actual decision on where the money is going, which is to Biddeford and Portland, I think that's a great outcome, you know, even though the process was not ideal. So again, we should be done with this whole issue of having subregions need to organize themselves in order to weigh in on the scoring.
I guess just because I have some interest in history with the PACTS process, I don't need to revisit it. Every time some of these things come up, it just opens up the ghost of allocations past and other issues, and it makes me nervous.
And I think that's part of the reason why we're trying to get our scoring to a more objective place. I mean, that's a lot of the reason why we're going through this very comprehensive TIP process, you know, that Erin is beautifully chairing, because it's got a lot of people on that committee, so that we can get to a place where it's a lot more transparent, data-based, and objective.
And Jim, I'll say also that the planning committee's recommendation to look into a holding wind transfer to fund a second project came from a good place. It came from a place that acknowledged the benefits of multiple projects and the value of moving multiple projects along. It didn't come from a place where you know, it didn't get into the point allocation or anything like that. So I think it started from a really good place. The other thing I'll say is the central subregion did make an effort through phone calls to notify staff about the point allocation for that particular project in Portland, but that message was not conveyed quite in time.
So, I mean, my sense would have been is that this would have been cleaner if it would have just been, regardless of what happened after the fact, the committee recommended that we do a second project, and that because the second project, if I've had the scoring correct, was a Portland project, that would have been the one that would have gone. And then Portland and Chris would have said, we really would like to be able to move this project to the front as opposed to the other project. I just think it would have been cleaner. And it didn't, and would have made it so much easier to do this and not had all the other issues with, oh, we're letting somebody come in with points afterwards that didn't meet the deadlines and all those other criteria. I mean, I like the outcome. I do not like the process at all. And I think it could come back later. And so I just think it's cleaner if you've done it a little differently.
Thanks,
I'll be
Jim.
quiet, and I move that we proceed with the motions that were included within the package.
So Jim has made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. And Chris Branch has his hand up as well.
Just one comment or two. First off, one of the goals of this group is to have what we call shovel-ready projects. You really can't have a shovel-ready project if you don't have a PDR in place. So I think some of the comments that Chris made about getting additional PDR projects available, if we do get some money that happens to come along, which at this point looks doubtful, we've got the possibility of getting more than one project or ready to go to bid pretty quickly after you get through the PDR process. I think the other thing is the comment Chris made. Portland did request and met with the central subregion in regards to the allocation of funds. And as Chris said, that allocation of the central subregion points to them got back after the deadline. I've got some concerns with how the notification process went with that, but I know as someone who works for a municipality and is dealing with elected officials, and that's kind of what we are in this framework, I need to go out of my way to make sure that I contact the right organizations to make sure that they're directly aware of these types of issues and to make sure that they get the information in a timely fashion. So Portland was under the impression that this had been done. I was a little taken aback when we found out it wasn't. It's just an error. No blame to go anywhere per se, but I think we can, could the process have been a little cleaner? As Jim says, yeah, probably, but I've seen a lot bigger changes in process in PACTS than this over the years.
Aaron. And then I'll come to Eric next.
I was just going to say that while the process may not have been ideal, when we were starting out at the beginning of this TIP committee, we weren't even sure we were going to have one project funded for PDR because we were on such a tight time constraint. So the fact that we are now, while it wasn't ideal, we are at the fact where we have two to fund, I think is a great outcome, because otherwise we wouldn't have anything in the pipeline. So I definitely think that we should move forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. Eric?
Yeah, my question is, what's the balance of the win, the holding win?
Let's see, I believe the current balance was 920,000.
Has that been trending upward, downward?
Downward. The last, let's see, last month's executive committee meeting, I believe, included transfers of approximately $400,000 or $450,000 from the holding win. So we were at 1.4 million at one point. And if you speak to the DOT, they'd say that's too much, right? Like they want to. There's kind of a balance for that rainy day fund and providing contingencies, but then having too much money in the holding win where it's not really going out to the economy quick enough.
Great. My only comment is that I think there are shovel-ready projects, some things that have been shelved or pushed forward due to the bidding environment. And my only concern is that, those are still struggling budget-wise, and we should consider that as we vote on this topic to take money out of the holding win for future projects.
Thanks, Eric. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we do have a motion and a second. Ryan, would you be so good as to call the roll call, please?
Or Jim Bennett.
Yes.
Chris Branch.
Yes.
Tom Reinauer.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes. Yes.
And Matt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Good comments and actions for future discussion as well. So thank you for that. Next item we have is PACTS Committee restructuring. And Christina is going to tee this up and facilitate the discussion. And then Chris Chop will walk us through the specific changes as they pertain to this. So Christina,
Thanks, Matt. So the executive committee heard kind of a first reading of this at the last meeting in September. You guys provided us some substantial comments, and so we have for you a revised proposal today. Our intention is to bring it after we hear your comments today to the policy committee at the end of October. Just to ground us, in 2018 in the PACTS reforms process, we identified one of our major strategies is operate with excellence, and said that we had too many committees and that the governing committees are not meaningfully engaging on public transportation. Then the governing committees gave us specific guidance for kind of a strike team on looking at committee restructuring, and said that we needed to both collapse the number of committees, increase the amount of elected participation if possible in governing committees, increase the amount of transit agency participation in governing committees, and also consider adding community transportation leaders to the representation of the governing committees. And you all heard from them, I guess, right before the pandemic in January. So you know that we've been training a group of 23 folks to be knowledgeable about transportation decision-making and to engage in a constructive way as we move forward with strengthening our infrastructure and our transit system. So at the last meeting, we gave you the best practices research as we looked at MPOs across the nation. I won't repeat that there, but that gave us a lot of guidance on the committee restructuring. So today, the main points here are you'd said, let's not combine the executive and policy. Again, you know, it's working pretty well, so let's keep those separate. So we went back to that original idea. That would be 12 meetings per year, and probably the same setup where the executive committee meets 8 times, and in the months that the executive committee doesn't meet, the policy committee will meet, so that'll be 4 times a year. And then we would have a regional transportation advisory committee, and that committee will be composed of basically the representation that you have from technical planning and transit. And we've changed the representation there a little bit. And I'm going to toss it over to Chris C., who will walk through some of the specific changes between the proposal you saw on September 1st and the proposal you're seeing today. And then we'll come back and have a discussion.
Great, thanks, Christina. Okay, so as Christina mentioned, reverting back to 2 governing bodies, executive and policy, and in this case, referring to them as executive and policy boards, which are perhaps a bit more in line with FHWA federal language. And in addition, having still the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee. Some of the key changes are kind of bulleted in this introduction, and then I'd also refer folks to attachment D in a minute, or you're welcome to peruse that now. The Regional Transit Advisory Committee, one of the notable changes is sub-regional nominations at 3 per region rather than 3 to 5 per region. We did hear that having too many members could be a concern, and so that was one of the changes we proposed. Transit agencies, having 4 total rather than 4 members, 1 from each mode of public transit. We added an environmental specialist position to capture to reflect kind of the big picture work we're doing as an organization, as well as the work the state's doing for the Maine Climate Council. The executive board, we added a couple of new important roles. One is to play the MPO's coordinating role in the FTA split process. This is to give, building on the PACTS reforms that Christina mentioned, to give our governing bodies a little bit more say in the allocation of public transit resources. And you'll see in a minute, and throughout this restructuring, to have more representation from transit on all committees, particularly at the governing levels. The second one was to approve time-sensitive federal funding allocations for the region, things like CARES allocations or future CARES programs or things like that. And we revised the transit agency members to 3 rather than 4. And you'll see in the policy board, we're recommending all 7 transit agencies are represented. We added an active transportation specialist with the intent that it would exclude municipal staff. And so it wouldn't necessarily be another municipal vote, but someone that thought about active transportation from a holistic regional perspective, and hopefully brought significant expertise to the table. All transportation users, are an active transportation user at some point in their typical trip. We extinguished term limits on executive, although some seats will be tied to policy board terms. We do have a question about that below that we'll get to. The policy board, we reduced the overall municipal membership, recommending municipalities each have 1 member, except for Portland with 3. The idea of these, the membership being roughly proportionate to municipal populations. Right now we have, Portland's got 6, and many other municipalities have 2 or 3, and then a bunch have 1, which kind of creates this huge potential committee. And given the fact that we were adding committee members, we wanted to be cognizant of of reducing it elsewhere and making sure it was manageable. Like I said, we added all 7 transit agencies to the policy board. This is consistent with some recent guidance that we've seen from FTA regarding cooperative planning and in the allocation of FTA funds. And so we have a couple questions laid out here, and then I'll again refer to folks to attachment D, but one question would be, should the Transportation Advisory Committee appoint a seat or 2 to executive and policy boards to kind of hardwire that representation and that kind of cross-pollination between committees? And then another question would be, which executive board seats should be subject to term limits, if any? And on my screen now, I'm going to scroll down to attachment D. And you'll see we highlighted some of these key changes throughout the tables that you've seen before. Again, the Regional Transportation Advisory Committee, the RTAC, a couple minor changes shown in yellow. The Executive Board, you see again, changes in yellow, capturing the things I just mentioned. Same with the policy, including the municipal representation, highlighting municipalities where membership potentially changes. So with that, Christina, do you have anything to add on specifics before we open it up?
No, I'll just thank you, Chris, for going through the details. As we know, the details really matter, and we want to hear your input on them. But to kind of scope back to how this would functionally work. So the governing committees will basically work the same ways. You have some shifting representation, particularly on policy, and more, you'll have some community transportation leaders, a couple other specialists to represent people in the region, kind of the citizens and active stakeholders, and you'll have a lot more transit representation. Then the RTAC will meet once a month also, and that is really conceived of as being professional staff from municipalities and from transit agencies. And we wanted to mix it so that you have managers, planners, and engineers / public works directors. You get all 3 of those perspectives. And you also have your sub-regional perspectives. So, I think one of the concerns that came up last time is very large committees. Maybe one of the more controversial things to talk about is the reduction in some of the representation from the more populous municipal representation on the policy committee. That was really our attempt as staff to find a way to keep the committee not outrageously large. I mean, in practice, what happens is that our policy committee is maybe our meetings, we might have another 5, 6, 7 people that attend. We hardly ever have 6 Portland representatives or 2 Saco representatives. I mean, the practice of how that plays out is pretty similar to what you see in this representation, but of course it is a major change from the bylaws. So the other thing to remember is that we do a lot of detailed work. For example, figuring out the transit cares allocations. We're envisioning that would still happen with the key folks that are going to give us the best advice on those things. So we'll still have small ad hoc groups. They won't be standing committees though. They will be brought together for time-specific tasks to help us with certain things that need to go through either the RTAC or the boards. So that's the idea, that overall we'll have a big reduction in meetings. I'll remind you, we had 70 this year. This brings it down to 24 standing meetings, but we do acknowledge that there will still need to be work that happens through ad hoc committees. So I know that's a lot, but hopefully because you saw it before and you have the yellow highlights, you can see how things are different from September 1st. But why don't you, you can start with clarifying questions, or if you have comments, just jump right in.
Sure. First in the pool, Greg Jordan has his hand up.
Hi, so a clarifying question, or maybe two rather. Under the RTAC for the transit agencies, it says nominated by transit agencies, but I think the intent is for this to be mode representation by.
Thank you, Greg. We actually originally had it be one seat for each mode, and then realizing that we have different transit agencies with different capacities, that would give a permanent seat to the ferry and the train, and then we have 4 bus agencies that would compete for one. So instead of, kind of hardwiring by mode, we thought we'd leave it a little more flexible, and that the transit agencies could nominate whichever 4 they want. We also know that schedules go in flux, right? Sometimes Hank is super busy, sometimes Jack is not able to participate. So we just thought that it would be a little bit more flexible just to leave it up to the 7 providers to do the nominations. They would also nominate for executive. So you could have, say, 4 of the transit agencies and then the other 3 be on executive. So you could equally share the burden / responsibility / opportunity of being on these committees. But all 7 would be on the policy.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense, actually, on the RTAC side. My next question relates to what you just went into on the executive board, which is, I think I'm questioning whether or not it makes sense to have another set of nominations for executive, or whether it makes more sense for there to be continuity and representation on RTAC to the executive board. I think I tend to favor that those who are, at least I know you have 3 here for executive, so among the 4 that are on RTAC, I think I might recommend or suggest that 3 of those 4 actually go to executive, rather than have another slate of transit agencies who are more or less engaged in the RTAC work now going to executive committee and maybe not being as educated or as informed about what's going on at RTAC. So I think I'd recommend that if we're still open to possible changes on this. I don't know how others feel though.
We're definitely open to changes. That's why we're discussing today. I mean, we could do it 2 ways. Either the transit agencies could just do that, or
Sure.
we could hardwire it into the bylaws and require it.
I think I'd suggest hardwiring that piece, but that's just my 2 cents.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Jim Bennett?
I'm not comfortable with the way the seats are being allocated out. And when you take a look at some of the people that are going to get the same vote, and of course I'm looking through the Biddeford ones right now, some of the smaller communities are literally 1/5 or 1/6 the size of us and have nowhere near the transportation challenges that your larger communities have, and they have an equal opportunity there. And human nature being what it is my experience has always been that if you have somebody that regularly comes and participates, there's a sense that people try to figure out a way to divide up the pie to be able to make sure that anybody who's here and participating gets a slice of that. It just, with the needs and the money at stake, I'm not sure that that's going to be something that's going to work very well for the communities that are larger communities and quite frankly have take more of the lane miles and more of the traffic and more of the burdens that we have. One of the organizations that I'm familiar with has a situation where they have a 1 person, 1 vote scenario, except for certain items. And then those items, the votes become weighted so that you can keep the committee down, but you keep the representation set up in such a way that allows the communities that have more population and more transportation, they're able to have more weighted votes at the time when that stuff is really important. And that may be a hybrid model that might work.
So Jim, let me make sure I understand. So say like every municipality gets one vote, but so they'd have one representative, for example, but we would weight the vote heavier based on population?
Yeah.
So you keep the commit, is that what you're saying?
The reference that I'm using is the Mid-Maine Waste Action Committee, which is the Auburn incinerator that was set up where Auburn had 73 or 74% of the waste, and then the other 12 communities only made up 26%. And so the finessing that had to occur when that agency was created and they built that incinerator was that the small communities would never signed on if they didn't have any ability to control some of the destiny. And so that has a hybrid where each community had one person that was on the board. And for most items, it was one person, one vote. But there were specific things such as the budget adoption and other items that it required. It was based on a weighted vote, and it required an 85% in order to pass, in order to be able to make the collaboration and the effort work, so that you didn't have a bunch of people there, but it also worked out to that. I mean, this 3-1 scenario, I mean, certainly if I was in Portland, I wouldn't agree to have one vote when they have, easily twice what everybody else has, 3 times what everybody else has, and quite frankly has the most incredible demands in terms of transportation issues. So the 3-1 proposal you have may end up being okay, but then it would come down to as certain times when there's a weighted vote and it has a little bit of different percentage in order to accomplish both.
All right, so let me open up the question to the rest of the group. I think there are 2 questions. The first is, do people feel like the representation by population is something that's very important to retain? Give a thumbs up if you think that we need to have proportional representation based on population. Okay, so if that's true, I think we have 2 options here. One is the only proportional in this. I'm looking at the policy committee right now. If you look at the policy committee representation, you've got Biddeford, Saco, Scarborough, and South Portland having 1 rather than 2, which is what's in the current bylaws. And also, the current bylaws call for additional seats as population grows over time based on the decennial census. So that could change in several years where that representation would change. And Portland has 6 right now, and this is proposed as 3. So we could go back to having 2 representatives each for Biddeford, Saco, Scarborough, and South Portland, and 6 for Portland. I think that's one option if people feel like we want to do that. The other is we could do a vote structure that's based on population, where everybody gets 1 representative on the policy committee, but the votes may be weighted more heavily based on population. We could come up with a formula. So I'd be curious as to discussion on that, and then we'll do like kind of thumbs up, thumbs down to see which direction you want to go. But let's hear some comments first about those 2 options.
Chris, I know you, Chris Branch, I know you're next in the queue. And then Jim, I see you have your hand up. I just want to make sure that that's still up, or if it's down.
I have a tendency to agree with Jim on this one. I think that that's a more equitable way to do it. I mean, they do similar thing at EcoMaine with representation on the board. But trying to think how to do it might be a little more difficult, but I think in general, I agree with what he's pointing out. I don't think it's fair to have, a Westbrook and a Biddeford lumped into the same level as a Standish and a Raymond. It's just not equitable.
Chris, do you have an opinion, Chris, on whether the number of representatives should go up or whether we should go towards a weighting structure, weighted vote structure?
I'm more inclined, I think I'm more inclined to go with the weighting rather than the additional membership. I think that gives you a more equitable vote, because if you're going to go, and I think off of the population base, my guess is if you looked at the communities that had the highest amount of federal state highway system in them, that's probably tracks pretty close to what the populations of those towns are.
Yeah.
You know, I noticed that the DOT, Tom, was kind of neutral on this one, as far as whether it should be based on population or something else. It'd be interesting to get DOT's perspective on that. But I think generally the population base probably goes pretty close to where actual rankings for total mileage and traffic and so on and so forth goes. Clearly there's more in Portland than anywhere else. And, you know, my guess is it's more in Biddeford than there is in Arundel and so on and so forth. So I think I'd rather go with a weighting just to keep the size of the committee at a more manageable level.
Yeah, I'll just make one comment here, which is that it has been very rare. I can't actually think of a situation where the governing board was like split in a way where the weighting or the representation would make a really big difference on a vote. But that said, the bylaws need to kind of prepare for what I would call worst case scenario, where there is a real division. So if we went with a weighted voting structure, it's maybe very rare that we'd actually have to break out the formula and do the math. You know what I mean? Just in terms of the way we make decisions, I think overall we're pretty good at doing it by consensus. And, you know, sometimes we have a couple people voting against a motion, but it's rare that I've seen like a, you know, 10-9 split or something like that. So it might be more practical to do a weighted voting structure than we might think, just because we're not going to have to do it on every vote. I saw, Matt, I'm seeing that Hank has his hand up, as well as Greg, and I'm wondering if we can invite Hank to participate. He is.
Sure, that'd be great. And maybe Andrew, as you bring him on, Greg, if you want to provide your comment, then we'll go to Hank next if you'd like to provide comment.
Sure, thanks, Matt. So I agree with the approach of going with one member, one vote on the policy committee, and going with a weighted voting scenario. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think will make everything function a bit better. Metro went to when we brought Freeport, Brunswick, and Yarmouth onto our board last year, we wrestled with these issues and actually went to a weighted voting structure to deal with some of those things. And we did toss around the notion of whether or not you do a weighted vote on every single action, or whether or not you allow for someone to call a weighted vote. And we went with just doing the vote, the weighted vote on every action, and it takes a simple spreadsheet to punch in the votes as they come in. As you're doing roll calls, I don't think it's too hard to be doing that. But you can go either way on that one, whatever is most convenient in the end. Because as Christina, you're right, most votes are pretty unanimous, so you always have to do the calculation. But it's not that hard, actually. But in general, I'd support going that direction.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Frank. And Hank, if you have a comment, if you want to fire away.
No, my hand was still raised from earlier in the meeting. Sorry about that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay,
That's
sorry,
right.
Hank.
That was my guess as well, but I didn't want to be presumptuous. So thanks, Hank. And Jim Bennett.
Yeah, just to put a little more clarification on the MWAC model. The MWAC model is a straight one person, one vote, except on very specific items. And those were like the budget, the hiring of the executive director. There were a couple of items that were weighted. Otherwise than that, it wasn't used for any other purpose that was laid out in that fashion, so that the everyday ordinary business items, you don't really need to do a weighted vote to adopt the minutes. You don't need it to do for certain everyday administrative functions. So only times when basically when it's cash and any staff related role in terms of hiring, evaluating, that kind of stuff. Other than that, there's no reason to incorporate that into the day-to-day business, in my opinion.
Are there any other comments on weighted versus representation, weighted representation?
Yeah, Tom, go for it.
Yeah, sorry. For some reason, I can't find the hand thing this time, which I can't figure out, but I usually know where it is, but
this usually works.
Yeah. So somebody said, look at the end of your arm. You can't find it. Yeah, I mean, I think the weighting thing, there's precedent in the waste boards, and I think it could work as long as it's not too confusing. You know, I think it would need to see some research on how that would work, and maybe kind of some suggestions from staff on how it would work, and then maybe some items that it would be used for and items that it would be not. Because I think having a lot of people, I mean, the board structure in terms of the amount of people can get pretty unwieldy, and then you can run into problems if you've got even three or four members from one community, whether or not they really are going to show up to every meeting.
Right.
You know, that's on the communities, but everybody's busy, and that can be a problem. So I think keeping the size down, if it could be worked in kind of in a manageable way, I think that would probably work. But I'd like to see a little bit more detail on it, obviously, and how it would work, and kind of that part of it. And then I just had a comment on kind of the RTAC, if that's okay, at this point. Just a little bit of a concern about ad hoc committees or ad hoc groups, just to make sure that there's transparency there in terms of who it's documented, that who's going to be on those, that the meetings can be attended by others, that they're shared with, you know, kind of a wide group, and that's done, you know, in that kind of platform, because it can be, I can see some issues if 3 or 4 people start meeting and it's not really kind of made known that they're meeting, et cetera, and it kind of, just to make sure that everybody knows what's going on and everything's kind of on the up and up on that stuff. So just a little bit of a concern on that part of it.
Thanks, Tom. And I'll just respond to that. We actually have in here that one of the jobs of the executive committee, I think, is to inform the policy committee of any ad hoc committees that are appointed. So the appointments would need to be done by the governing committee. And then, of course, all of those meetings are PACTS meetings, so they would be publicly noticed. You know, folks that wanted, there's a website sign up. So those ad hoc committees would be listed on our website, and you can check the box if you want to get a notice of those agendas. So we do both things. People can proactively ask for the agendas, but we also would be posting them. So I think you're absolutely right. It all has to be transparent, and there can't be any meetings that are happening that are ad hoc committees that have been appointed by the governing committees.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like you got it covered.
And Christine, I would weigh in. I'm in favor of the discussion as well, as far as the allocation going. Because I think, you know, at some point in time, we are going to have a census, an updated census coming, and our membership will also change as a result of new numbers. We may be adding additional communities. So I think instead of watering it down, and many of the communities that will be jumping on will not be dealing with the same level of issues that the larger communities do have. So I think that there is a way that we need to have that representation on the larger populations, because they do face much greater challenges when it comes to that and need to address those. So I think I agree with like the MWAC or the Eco-Maine style of allocation, and then looking at it. I mean, ultimately, I think Jim's right when it comes down to money. That's where I think it's important to have that there, and then on heavy decisions, as opposed to the administrative decisions that we can just bang out on a simple majority. But you know, and looking at the listing, and all due respect to many of the communities that are on there, half of these don't even show up to any of the meetings. So allocating one, you know, the same weight to them as you may to Biddeford or Saco or Scarborough or South Portland, does not seem that it's representative of the need, desire, or reality, quite frankly, as to what we're all facing. So I mean, and Cape, it's great that Cape has a vote, and you know, we stay active because we're part of the central subregion, and but I think about where I live, and Gray's probably going to jump on, and you know, they deal with a whole separate set of issues there, and nowhere's near what the heavy lifts that the larger communities have to face. So I think if we can come with that, you know, work on that, I think that's a great way to go forward.
So let me summarize what I think I'm hearing, and then I'm going to ask for your thumbs. That we will go towards a weighted vote. So every municipality will have one vote, and but it will be weighted on certain issues. And I think staff will probably come back with a specific proposal on where we calculate our weighted votes. I think it will probably be related, as Jim said, to money allocations and probably also to major strategic direction and policy. And that, I think that's it. So I guess I just want to, I know, Jim, you've got a comment, and then we're going to go to thumbs on whether, okay, let's go to Jim and then Eric on comments.
I just think you may want to consider whether or not, given the size and the challenges Portland has, that they ought to have a second person that would be on that. I think trying to, even though they'd have weighted votes, having one person sitting there compared to Raymond or Arundel. Just think we ought to think about that.
I see Chris Branch nodding, so that we would divide the weights between Portland. We're going to get an awesome spreadsheet here, Andrew Clark. I'm looking to you for some good math. So Chris, I'm going to come to you, Eric, but I just want to see your initial reaction to that.
I would agree with Jim's comment. I think one thing is, if we have, Portland has a lot of expertise on staff, plus that would give us the opportunity to have a staff person there as an elected official, although I think I've been in 4+ years now, I think I've seen one elected official from Portland attend a PACTS meeting.
Okay, so
other than the old lunch.
Okay, great. All right, Eric, sorry to hurry you guys along. I'm just realizing we only had 20 minutes for this. We got the rest of the agenda.
Yeah, as we're looking at weighting, I just kind of want to put a plug in for the West Sub-region, because we're all at one vote apiece. Westbrook's almost 19,000 in population. Gorham's almost 18,000 in population. Wyndham is 17,000 and about 2, I think. We're looking at 4 votes in the West Sub-region for a population of around 70,000. We're looking at the Central Sub-region having 9 votes at just under 100,000. We look at the North Sub-region, they got 33,000 in population with 4 votes. I didn't do the South Sub-region, but it's not because I was leaving them out, but I only had so much time.
So let me just clarify, as we do this weighted system, we can do it on actual population, right? There's a way to do that, and I'm sure Andrew Clark will figure it out for us.
Good luck, Andrew.
Okay, so I want to take thumbs now based on if you're in agreement with weighting based on population with 2 seats for Portland. Okay, I can't see. Okay, we got 1 thumbs down. Greg, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just don't understand the need to go to 2 seats on Portland when you're weighting the votes. I don't think that makes any sense. I think it's going to make things more confusing.
So the reason that I heard was Chris wanted to bring an elected along, so that there would actually be 2 different perspectives represented in Portland. That's kind of what I was hearing. Chris Branch, is that correct?
Yeah, assuming we can actually get them to attend the meeting.
Yeah, in which case, Greg, the math would be that, Portland's 2 votes wouldn't be multiplied by 67,000 votes. Each one would be 33.5.
Okay, I think it's unnecessary, but okay.
I think you just got to recognize that the Portland is so much bigger than the other communities that you need to recognize that, and you need to have, it's not like everybody else is. You got blocks of people that are in the 20,000 range, and you get another block in that 12 to 15,000 range, and then we drop all the way down to 3,000 to 4,000, 5,000. I mean, you just got to recognize the scale on that, and I think it's more symbolic in order to be supportive than substantive, but I think it's an important symbolic piece.
You might as well go back to seats then, but okay.
Aaron Courtney has her hand up as well.
Yeah, sorry. So if the Portland elected official didn't show up and they're divided, would that mean that Portland would really only have 33,000? It would only be 1 instead of 60 something?
That would only be fair if they got 2 seats. Chris.
Yeah, just as EcoMaine board, we've got 5 spots on the EcoMaine policy. And it doesn't matter whether 1 person from Portland shows up or 5 shows up, we still get 5 votes. So if Portland shows up with only one person, then it should get its equivalent in population vote, whatever that is. Say it's 20% when you weight it. I'm assuming, we're somewhere between 300 to 350,000. The PACTS region for population in Portland is 67 to 70,000.
I think you got to pick a lane on this one, Chris.
Pardon?
I think you got to pick a lane on this. Either you get 2 representatives with the allocated votes. I mean, sorry to be like directive about this, but I feel like it wouldn't really be fair if Portland has 2 seats, but and they're weighted by population, and then one shows up and gets the full weight, right? Like, I think you either have 2 there and you get all of your votes, and just like any other community, if Arundel doesn't show up, they don't get their votes. So
I don't think it's going to be a problem either way, because we'll have 2 people at the meeting no matter what, because we use alternates.
Okay.
So if an elected official, say, who's there doesn't show up, we have an alternate show up for the meeting. And I can tell you right now, we all vote the same anyway. That's all discussed prior to the meetings. So it's like 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Matt,
sorry.
I want to wrap this because I feel like staff has gotten enough direction to bring you back the final proposal for the policy committee. But I don't want to let an opportunity go by to see if there's any other comments on any of the other pieces of the proposal.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Let me just jump in real quick. On the matter of weighted voting in the municipality, just wanted to clarify on MTA, main dot transit agencies, they'll just go 1 votes, right?
That's what the proposal is.
Okay.
I mean,
Wanted to make sure.
you could do the same thing with the transit agencies based on budget or ridership.
No, I think it's fine as 1 vote per agency, as you have it outlined, but I just wanted to make sure we were all aware of that in the context of going to a weighted voting among the municipalities.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I should have made that clear as we're thinking about this proposal. If people have any objections to that, please speak up. Chris Branch?
On other questions, there's a question in here about whether or not the RTAC should have some type of representation on the executive committee and the policy committee.
Yeah.
And my opinion is that there should be 1 person from the RTAC who's on the executive and the policy committee so that they can bring forward the recommendations from the RTAC and explain it to those groups and be a representative of that particular opinion that's coming to us from that group. I think it's very important to have a representation from the RTAC on those committees.
Okay. Give us a thumbs up if you agree. Okay, so we'll make sure that continuity happens. We'll add that in. Any other comments?
I just wanted to see clarification on the comment Greg mentioned. So presumably, City of Portland could have 6 votes, and it'd be proportionate to population. The City of Portland, say, has 6 votes. Just want to make sure folks are clear that in this case, yeah, again, Maine DOT would have 1 vote. The transit agencies would have 3 collective votes. So half of 1 municipality's vote. And to ensure that, I mean, we'll do the math in the spreadsheet, but want to make sure that was clear to folks, that that's a possibility.
I think, actually, Chris, this is bringing up a question for me. I think the weighting is only happening on the policy committee,
Okay.
right? So the weighting is just on the policy committee. So every agency, whether it be Maine DOT or a transit agency, has 1 vote. The municipalities will have a weighted vote.
Correct, yeah. So I should have said 7, yeah.
Yep.
7 transit agency votes.
Okay. Any last comments?
I'd just say the question of term limits, it would just, from my perspective, only the officers.
Only the officer should have term limits.
In other words, you can't be John Martin of PACTS.
Old school reference. I love it.
Chris, what do we have proposed right now for term limits?
I think we were deferring to the group. We had on executive, no formal term limits, but maybe tied to policy board term limits. So those that are on both. On policy, we had 3 years, but maybe reappointed for 1 consecutive 3-year term.
Yeah. I think we were thinking that there needs to be some turnover, But otherwise, but we all know the classic debate between term limits and no term limits. So I won't go over the pros and cons of that. So Jim, you're saying that you don't think there should be term limits at all for policy committee?
No, I mean, if you get communities that have somebody that they want to have on this and be there and is getting invested and understands the process and understands everything, man, that's gold. Keep them.
All right, I see some nodding from Eric and Aaron on that. Do other people feel that that's right, that only term limits for officers?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I've been on this committee in various times for about a dozen years, and I'm 10 years or
so. You have a vested interest in no term limits?
I still haven't figured it out.
No, okay. Okay, all right, so we will change that to just being for officers. All right, what else?
We have a hand raised, Christina from Tom Milligan.
Tom, thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Are you taking comments on the RTAC or just?
Yeah.
Okay. Just backing up a half a step, not because Jim's my boss, but I agree with what he said about the understanding. I've been on policy committee for, I think it was 2007. I saw something the other day just as a fill-in to start with. And it's incredibly complicated to understand all the nuances and rules. And I saw a lot of people nodding as Jim was saying that. Enough said on that. My concern on the RTAC is I'm afraid that some of the, I'll call it down and dirty work, some of the on the ground work from, and particularly the technical committee, because I don't go to planning committee meetings, may be lost, and their thoughts and opinions may be lost with such a limited group on the RTAC. I mean, again, it's an incredibly complicated process, and you can't walk into the room and have anywhere near a full understanding, probably the first couple years on what rules pertain to what particular program and this and that. So that's my concern, that some of these committees that do the everyday heavy lifting work, even though they can provide their opinions, but my understanding they're going away, so there won't even be that opportunity to provide their opinions to the RTAC. I feel that's going to be a disservice to the overall process on where we're trying to go with regional transportation issues. Perhaps if there was those boards, planning, technical and whatever, stay in existence and can provide input to the RTAC committee and let it go up through the line, I think that would work. I'm concerned with the overall effect by eliminating, say, the technical committee, if that is in fact what the intent is. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, that is the intent, that we're getting rid of 3 of these advisory committees and making 1 advisory committee. The construction of the RTAC is to combine public works expertise with planning expertise, with transit expertise, so that we really have a much more holistic approach to the decisions that we're making. That said, I do anticipate that things like collector paving or the regional traffic management system, there will need to be some ad hoc meetings to work out some of the technical details, in which case we would have a broader representation of, say, technical folks to help us with those things. Same thing with transit on kind of figuring out the overall framework for how we're allocating the CARES funds. So we'll still need to tap everybody's expertise, but I think what we're trying to get to here is a more efficient and holistic decision-making process.
One thing I could suggest, it would be work for staff, but I think it could be really useful to maybe do like a PACTS 101 training once these new committees get up and rolling, since there'll be a lot of new members as part of the RTAC, and then there'll be folks that were on technical, now they're talking about planning issues and transit and vice versa. So I think some kind of 2-hour training, optional training for folks could be useful.
Okay, so this item was not for vote. This was for you to give us input so we can finalize the recommendation for the policy committee. And I think that we got what we needed. If there's anything else that anyone wants to offer, just feel free to email Chris Chop and myself before the policy committee meeting. Thanks. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks,
Christina,
Christina. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody else. That was a great discussion. Moving on to number 8, which is Transit Together. And Ryan, would you like to take the ball and run?
Sure, and just a technical note for folks. I know we are approaching 10 o'clock. For the Zoom link, we can keep going. I don't know if folks have other commitments, but our Zoom link will allow us to continue with the meeting. So in this agenda item, Tom Bell, our Public Information Officer, had come up with the name Transit Together for a study, and the Executive Committee's policy statement is in the packet. I won't read through that. But as we're starting to flesh this out, we are envisioning 3 components of the study. We envision working with a consultant on reimagining the transit network and evaluating system efficiency and building consensus for that reimagined network. We think we can work with the same consultant or possibly a sub-consultant on analyzing system efficiency. And by this, we're talking about back office operations, maintenance, driver pools, fleet operations, customer interfaces. This is sort of the less public-facing piece, more the back office operations. And then probably a separate consultant on facilitation to manage our stakeholder process. We know that some of those elements I just talked about will likely involve change to the status quo for transit agencies, for the riding public, for institutions currently served by transit or possibly not served by transit. So we think we'll need a robust facilitation process, a stakeholder engagement process to manage that as we go forward. We want to make sure that our focus throughout all of this is on improving the experience for transit users and transit employees, making the best use of our limited transportation funding and bolstering the viability of transit as a preferred option. We want to make sure we're not presuming any particular outcome at the start of this, and rather kind of viewing this as a continuum of potential outcomes at the end of all this. We envision that this would be managed by the PACTS Policy and Executive Committees and by a project advisory committee, similar to the way our Transit Tomorrow project has been managed. And we have $380,000 currently available for this through our CARES Act Phase 2 funds. There is a draft timeline in the packet that I'd suggest folks take a look at either now or as they have some time, but obviously not official, but that's kind of our initial thinking on what this timeline for the work might look like. And our ask for the committee today is to consider this proposed approach. Again, it's not finalized, our initial thoughts on this. So let us know what you're thinking about this proposed approach, and then empower the PACTS chair and vice chair in consultation with the transit committee chair and vice chair to start to appoint members to that policy advisory committee.
Questions or comments for Ryan on that? Oh, sure, Tom.
I'd like to hear from maybe Greg or Hank on this, but when I read through kind of the scope, it seemed like there were a couple different things that might not really mesh together in terms of looking at the system. And by that, I took it as being kind of the root system and looking at efficiencies and improvements, but then looking at kind of opportunities for more coordination or maybe moving towards some type of consolidation of some sort. So maybe I just misread the scope, but just wanted to get some clarification. Are we looking at doing both of those things or just?
So Tom, maybe I'll kick us off on this. So at the policy committee kind of gave us the direction to look at opportunities for integration, strategic partnerships, and consolidation. We spoke with several folks around the country who've done this kind of work, and they made the case, at least compellingly to me, that to lead with what the administrative outcome is probably not a great way to approach it. That it would be better to look at it from the customer point of view, from the transit employee point of view, and from the taxpayer point of view, and see what kind of outcomes you can get there. That may lead us to an understanding that we could have, a consolidated marketing department or, something like that, where there are elements of the agencies that may administratively come together, but we want that form to follow what the outcome is that we're trying to achieve. So the way that the scope is put together is it takes a look at routes and schedules and says how could we better connect all of the transit routes for customers. Then it looks at what are some of the ways that we might be able to find ways to cooperate and on the back office side. And then the other piece, of course, is trying to facilitate, because every agency, transit agency, will have to make its own decision about whether it implements the recommendations. And so it's going to be very important to have everybody at the table. And we're thinking really it's probably transit agency management, governance, and labor that all need to be represented alongside customers and stakeholders as we go through the study. Does that help, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with that approach. I just wanted to kind of clarify where the general direction and kind of the outline for moving that forward.
There's like a very technical piece to this, right? Which is the system redesign kind of look at it. And then there's a financial side to it, which is looking at the back office. And then there's what I would call the stakeholder engagement side, which is probably even more important than what the technical outcomes are, to make sure that everybody's voice is fully heard, and that we find ways that the transit agencies see benefit in participating and implementing whatever comes out of the technical studies.
And I think just another comment, if it's okay. I think, trying to figure out how this kind of interplays with all the other studies going on. Obviously that's a given, but just a reminder that probably should be a pretty key piece of whoever gets on board to do this next step, is to take a look at all that's going on and kind of making sure that all those are integrated as much as they can be, and also take a look at some of the past efforts that have kind of gone down this path, and see if there's anything that could be salvaged from those. I think the last one was probably 8 years ago. It was pretty comprehensive in terms of taking a look at the more coordination, et cetera. And a lot of that work has been progressing with the transit providers since then. So just kind of a comment that those two things should probably be considered.
Most definitely.
Any other comments, questions? So we need direction. I'm taking that, Ryan. If we want to, is there a motion, I guess, to empower the PACTS chair, vice chair, in consultation with the transit committee chair and vice chair, to appoint members to the project advisory committee? Is that the motion we're looking for?
So moved.
Thanks, Greg. Is there a second? Oh, thank you. And I think that was Chris, right?
Yes.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. So any further discussion? Seeing none. Ryan, would you call the roll, please?
Yep, I know Jim had to step out. So Chris Branch, that puts you first.
Yes.
And Tom Reinauer?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yep.
Eric?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
And Matt?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
And then the next item we have is item number 9, which is PACTS transportation funding, data, and analysis. And Christina, this is your turn to shine once again.
Yeah, well, thank you. Chris Branch was the person who brought this up at the last meeting, which is that we really need some better data and information to understand the amount of money that the PACTS region is getting, and also what the gap is in the money that we need for our transportation infrastructure. Hopefully this is a pretty straightforward item for you. Staff went back and tried to scope out what needs to be done. We need to work closely with Maine DOT, so you, Tom Reinauer, and your team, to kind of get some of the data that I think we don't have. We feel like we can do that within the existing UPWP allocations and start to at least bring some data back to you. I think the main, and we're prepared to do that so long as you want to give us that direction. The question for you is whether we want to do some analysis and developing of messaging and other kinds of communications materials so that we start to educate the policymakers and residents of the region about this gap. If we want to take the kind of data analysis and really convert it into good communications, we're probably going to need to divert some money from other parts of the UPWP in order to have the resources to do that well. So the action here before you is basically, tell us to go forth and get the data if you want us to do that within existing resources. And if you're curious about what it might cost for us to take it to the communications phase, direct us to work up a cost estimate for you for the next meeting and some ideas about where that money might come from in the UPWP.
Thank you, Christina. Any questions or discussion?
Do you need a motion for this?
That'd be great, Chris. That would be to direct staff to develop the data analysis and advise us to, and then also to develop a cost estimate for the communication pieces of the scope and a proposed reallocation of resources in the UPWP.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it. It's Tom.
Yep. Thanks, Tom. And Tom, looked like you had a comment, if I'm not presumptuous here.
I did, but I can wait until it moves forward.
Okay. Any further discussion on the item? We have a motion in a second. Okay, Ryan, would you like to call the roll?
Sure. I see Chris is already unmuted. Chris Bridge.
Yes.
Tom Reinauer.
Yep. Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
And Matt.
Yes.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
So just a reminder that, there's a difference between the education piece and the lobbying piece. If you are going to be using federal funds for that part of it, just to kind of, there's a fine line there, and just want to make sure that we do that properly so that we don't run into trouble with either federal transit or federal highway, just in terms of the difference between those two things. And I know you're well aware of it, Christina, just a reminder of that we want to make sure we're not going down that path. Perfectly fine to use dues and that type of funding for the other piece of it, but really it's more of an education effort that I think you're going for. So just a reminder.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, this is pure education, using federal funds just to develop data and analysis. And I think even the communications pieces will just be about what the money is that's coming into the region, what money is needed, and if there were more money, what it could buy. GPCOG has its own advocacy work, but that's completely member dues funded or funded through other sources that are not federal funding.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you all. Is there any other business that the board would like to bring up? Okay, seeing none. Our next meeting for the executive committee, at least, is November 3rd. And then the policy committee next meeting will be on October 22nd. And then there are other committees that are as well as that are going on during the month. So thank you everybody for sticking it out and going the extra few minutes here. I appreciate it. And so we can get our work done. And all we're looking for now is a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Chris. And Greg, Jordan with a second. Perfect. Thank you. And if there is no objection, we shall call this meeting adjourned with the unanimous consent unless there is dissent from that motion. Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your week and appreciate you all taking the time. Take good care.
Yeah, thanks. See you later.
Bye. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.